My father-in-law, Carl, called me a beggar in front of the entire bank, laughing at my request for $50. His scornful laughter echoed until I smiled and withdrew $5 million from the account. The room went silent and Hiffle to his knees. But that was only the beginning. I, Fred Cooper, underestimated by everyone I loved, decided it was time to get justice, and no one was going to stop me from doing it. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. The glass doors of First Interstate Bank hissed shut behind me, sealing in the hum of air conditioning and the faint scent of paper and coffee. My old leather wallet, worn soft at the edges, weighed heavy in my hand. I needed $50, just enough to cover Mrs. Larson's medical bill next door. She'd been kind to me since my wife passed, and I wasn't about to let her worry over a few bucks. My boots clicked on the marble floor, echoing faintly in the busy lobby. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, its hands creeping toward noon. Time always seemed to press harder when I was in a rush. I joined the line, adjusting my faded blazer. It hung loose on my shoulders, a relic from better days. People whispered around me, clients in suits, a young couple arguing over a loan. The tellers tapped at their keyboards, their faces blank. I caught me reflection in the glass partition, gray hair thinning at the temples, a slight stoop, but my eyes were steady. I'd learned to carry myself with quiet dignity, even when the world tried to grind me down. Then I heard him. That voice, booming, polished, dripping with self-satisfaction. Carl Wilson, my father-in-law, stood near the manager's desk, waving his arms like a conductor. His tailored suit gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and a gold watch flashed on his wrist, catching every eye. He was bragging about his new car, some sleek thing he didn't need. Paid cash, of course, he said loud enough for the whole bank to hear. The manager, a wiry man with glasses, nodded politely, but his smile was tight. Carl's eyes landed on me, and his grin widened, sharp as a blade. "Well, look who's here," he called, striding over. Fred Cooper, gracing us with his presence. His tone was warm, but I knew better. It was the kind of warmth that burned. "Carl," I said, keeping my voice even. I shifted my wallet to my other hand, feeling the weight of the line behind me. The elderly woman next to me glanced up, her eyes kind but curious. "What brings you out, Fred?" Scraping together pennies again. Carl's laugh was loud, performative. He adjusted his tie, the gesture practiced like he was on a stage. The manager glanced our way, then looked down at his papers. "I need $50, I said simply. No need to explain, not to him. Carl's eyebrows shot up, mock surprise. 50 whole dollars. "What's it for, Fred? Charity case? Are you finally treating yourself to a decent meal?" His laugh rolled through the lobby, drawing chuckles from a man in a suit behind me. The teller, a young woman with a tight bun, averted her gaze, her cheeks pink. I felt the heat rise in my chest, but it kept my face still. I remembered a Christmas dinner years back, Carl holding court at the table, boasting about his business, while I sat quietly, my wife's hand on mine. I'd lent him $10,000 that year to save his company. He never thanked me, never even mentioned it. "Something worthwhile," I said, my voice low. The clock ticked louder, or maybe it was just my pulse. Carl leaned closer, his cologne sharpened, overpowering. "Come on, Fred. Don't tell me you're still playing the saint. You've been scraping by forever. When are you going to live a little?" His words were a taunt, each one a jab. The elderly woman in line frowned, her lips pursing. I caught her eye, and she gave a small nod like she understood. I could have told him the truth. Could have said I'd built a fortune in real estate brick by brick while he was busy flashing his fake wealth. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I let the silence stretch, my fingers tightening on my wallet. Inside it, tucked behind a faded photo of my wife, was a letter she'd written before she died. "You're stronger than they know," it said. I carried it everywhere. Carl laughed again, turning to the manager. "See this guy? My daughter's husband. And he's begging for pocket change. A real rags to riches story." "Huh?" The manager forced a smile, but his eyes darted tome, uncertain. The teller glanced up, her fingers pausing on the keyboard. She looked like she recognized me, though I couldn't place her. My jaw clenched, but I didn't flinch. I'd spent years swallowing his insults for my wife's sake, for my son's. But something shifted inside me like a door creaking open. I'd had enough. I stepped forward, my boots steady on the marble. The line moved, and I was next. Carl's laughter followed me, but it sounded hollow now. I reached into my pocket, past the letter, and pulled out a folded document, a single sheet that held more power than Carl could ever dream of. I smiled, feeling the gnarled knot of anger in my chest loosen into something else, something sharp and certain. I approached the teller's window, the clock ticking, fading into the background. This was just the beginning. I stood at the teller's window, the folded document cool against my palm. The young woman behind the counter, her name tag read Emily, fumbled with her keyboard, her eyes flicking nervously between me and the crowd. The air in First Interstate Bank felt thicker now, charged with the weight of Carl's mocking laughter. He was still at it, his voice carrying over the hum of the lobby like a bad radio signal. $50, he crowed, turning to a man in a pinstripe suit. Can you believe this guy? My son-in-law, the pauper. Lehman chuckled, but it was half-hearted, like he wasn't sure he should. The elderly woman behind me shifted her weight, her purse clutched tight, her frown deepened, and I felt a flicker of gratitude for her silent support. The glass doors at the entrance caught my reflection again, showing a man who looked tired but unbowed. I straightened my shoulders, the ache in them a reminder of years spent carrying everyone else's burdens. Sir, Emily's voice was soft, hesitant. She leaned forward, her glasses slipping down her nose. You said $50. I nodded, sliding my wallet across the counter. That's right. My voice was calm, but inside my blood simmered. Carl's taunts were nothing new, but today they cut deeper. Each word a reminder of how he dismissed me for decades. I thought of a summer barbecue years ago when he bragged about building his empire while I grilled burgers for the family. I'd paid for the repairs on his house that year, too. He'd called it a favor and never mentioned it again. Carl sauntered closer, his gold watch glinting as he crossed his arms. What's the money for, Fred? Don't tell me you're still bailing out your neighbors. What's her name, Mrs. Larson? You're not her bank, you know. His tone was-syrupy, but his eyes were hard, daring me to snap. It's for a good cause, I said, meeting his gaze. My fingers brushed the document in my pocket, itsages worn from years of careful handling. It was more than paper. It was proof. Proof of everything I'd built while Carl was busy preening. A good cause. Carl snorted loud enough to turn heads. The man in the pinstripe suit looked away, pretending to check his phone. Emily's cheeks flushed and Shebusied herself with my account, her fingers trembling. You hear that, folks? Fred Cooper, the saint of Billings, scraping together pennies for charity. He spread his arms like he was addressing a theater. A few people laughed, a nervous, scattered sound. The elderly woman behind me muttered something under her breath, too soft to catch. I felt the eyes on me, the weight off their judgment. For a moment I was back in my son's graduation party, standing in the corner while Carl toasted to real success and pointedly ignored me. My wife had squeezed my hand then, her smile soft and steady. She'd always believed in me. Now, with her gone, I had to believe in myself. Carl, I said, my voice low but firm. You talk a lot for a man who's standing on borrowed ground. It was a small jab, but it hit. His smile faltered just for a second, and I saw the crack in his polished facade, the tattered edge of his confidence, like the faint scratch I'd noticed on his watch earlier. Here covered quickly, stepping closer. Borrowed ground. That's rich coming from you. What are you, Fred? A nobody who married my daughter and thinks he's something special. His voice rose and the lobby went quiet. The only sound the tick of the clock and the rustle of papers. Emily froze, her hands hovering over the keyboard. The man in the suit coughed, and the elderly woman's purse creaked as she gripped it tighter. I didn't answer. Not yet. My heart pounded, but my face stayed still, a mask I'd perfected over years of his barbs. Inside, though, something was shifting. I'd spent my life putting others first. My wife, my son, Evan Carl. I'd let him walk over me because I thought it kept the peace. But peace wasn't worth this. Not anymore. Check the account, I told Emily, sliding the document across the counter. My voice was steady, but my pulse raced. The document felt alive in my hands, a quiet promise of what was coming. Karloffed again, but it was thinner now, less certain. He didn't know what I held. Not yet. Emily hesitated, her eyes darting to Carl, then back to me. She unfolded the paper, her brow furrowing. I caught a glimpse of the glass doors again, their surface reflecting the lobby like a mirror. They were a way out and a way in to something new. "You're wasting her time, Fred," Carl said. Booth's voice had an edge like he sensed the ground shifting. He was wrong. I wasn't wasting anyone's time. I was done waiting. I leaned forward, my hand steady on the counter. The clock ticked on, but it didn't matter anymore. The door to my patience had slammed shut, and I wasn't going back. I stood at the teller's window, the air in First Interstate Bank thick with tension. Emily, the young teller, clutched my document, her eyes wide as she scanned the screen. Her glasses slipped further down her nose and her fingers trembled, hovering over the keyboard. The lobby had gone quiet, the hum of conversation replaced by the relentless tick of the wall clock. My heart thudded, but my face stayed calm. A practiced mask. In my pocket, next to the letter from my wife, was the check I was about to receive. It would change everything. "Sir," Emily whispered, her voice barely audible, "you're requesting $5 million." Her eyes flicked to me, then to the screen as if she couldn't believe the numbers. I nodded, my voice steady. "That's right. Transfer it to my secondary account." My words were simple, but they landed like a thunderclap. The man in the pinstriped suit behind me coughed, and the elderly woman gasped softly, her purse creaking in her grip. I felt their eyes, the weight of their shock, but I kept my focus on Emily. Carl, standing a few feet away, laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "$5 million. Fred, you've lost it. What's this? Some kind of prank?" His gold watch flashed as he waved a hand, but his smile was strained, his eyes darting to the manager who'd stepped closer. "Papers forgotten." "Check the account," I said, my tone cool but firm. I slid the document closer to Emily, its edges worn, but its power undeniable. It was more than paper. It was years of quiet work, deals made in smoky offices, risks taken while Carl was busy posing. I'd hidden it all, living modestly to keep my family safe. But I was done hiding. Emily typed faster now, her face pale. The screen glowed, reflecting in her glasses. It's confirmed," she stammered. "The funds are available." Her voice cracked, and the lobby seemed to hold its breath. The clock ticked louder. Or maybe it was just my pulse, steady and sure. Carl's laugh died. He stepped forward, his polished shoes squeaking on the marble. "That's impossible," he snapped, his voice rising. "Fred Cooper, with that kind of money, you're a nobody." His hands shook and a bead of sweat glistened on his forehead, catching the light. The manager frowned, glancing between us. I turned to Carl, my eyes locking onto his. For the first time, I saw fear in him, raw, unguarded. I leaned closer, my voice low, just for him. "You shouldn't underestimate me. Carl, by the way, I saw you last night at the diner with that woman. What would Margaret say?" His face went gray. He staggered, one hand grabbing the counter for support. "Fred," he choked, his voice a rasp. "Don't, please. I can explain." He sank to his knees, his suit crumpling, his watch scraping the floor. The lobby erupted in whispers, the man in the suit stepping back, the elderly woman's eyes wide with approval. I remembered the diner, Carl at a corner booth, laughing with a woman half his age, his hand on hers. I'd been picking up soup for Mrs. Larson, and there he was, oblivious. I hadn't planned to use it, but now it felt right. Emily handed me the check, her hands shaking. I folded it carefully, tucking it into my pocket next to my wife's letter. Her words echoed in my mind. "You're stronger than they know." She'd been right. The glass doors at the entrance gleamed, reflecting the stunned faces around me. They weren't just an exit. They were a beginning. "Keep it quiet, Carl," I said, my voice steady. "For now." I turned, my boots clicking as I walked toward the doors. The lobby was a blur of gasps and murmurs, but I didn't look back. Carl's pleas faded, drowned by the tick of the clock and the rush of my own thoughts. This was my first move, but it wasn't my last. I thought of my son George and the fight waiting for me at home. He'd chosen Carl's side, blind to the truth. That hurt more than Carl's insults, but I'd deal with it. I'd deal with all of them. The doors slid open, cool spring air hitting my face. I stepped outside, the check heavy in my pocket. My old pickup waited in the lot, its paint chipped but reliable. I climbed in, my hands steady on the wheel. The clock in my mind ticked differently now, not counting down, but counting up to justice, to truth. I started the engine, feeling the rumble beneath me. They had no idea what I was capable of. The engine of my old pickup sputtered as I pulled into the driveway, the gravel crunching under the tires. The springs hung low over Billings, casting long shadows across my modest house. I cut the ignition, the silence heavy, and patted my pocket where the check for $5 million rested, its weight both a triumph and a burden. My worn jacket clung to my shoulders, smelling faintly of dust and bank air. I wanted nothing more than to sit in my armchair, sip coffee, and let the day's victory settle. But as I climbed the porch steps, the front door stood ajar, a sliver of light spilling out. My stomach tightened. Someone was inside. I pushed the door open, the hinges creaking. The familiar scent of wood polish and brewed coffee greeted me, but the air felt charged like before a storm. Family photos lined the hall. My wife's smile frozen in time. George as a boy, grinning with a baseball glove. The living room was dim, the curtains half drawn. A wall clock ticked steadily, its rhythm a quiet reminder that time never stopped, not even for me. George stood by the couch, his back to me, phone in hand. His tailored suit looked out of place against the faded plaid cushions. His shoulders were rigid, his jaw set. "George," I said, my voice steady but soft. I set my keys on the side table, the clink loud in the quiet. "Didn't expect you here." He spun around, his eyes blazing. "What the hell did you do, Dad?" His voice was sharp, cutting through the room like a blade. He stepped forward, clutching his phone so tight his knuckles widened. "Carl called me. Said you humiliated him in front of everyone at the bank. Made him beg on his knees." I froze, my hand still on the table. The check in my pocket felt heavier, a silent witness to the truth. "I didn't make him do anything," I said, keeping my tone even. "He brought it on himself." George snapped, his face flushing. He paced, his polished shoes scuffing through. "You think you're some big shot now, dragging Carl's name through the mud. You embarrassed our whole family," his words stung. Each one a jab at the years I'd spent shielding him, sacrificing for him. I took a breath, steadying myself. The clock ticked on, relentless. "George, you don't know the half of it. Carl's been spitting on me for years. You think he's the man you should look up to?" I stepped closer, my boots heavy in the hardwood. I was protecting my dignity. "Something you might understand if you'd listen. Listen." He laughed, a bitter sound that echoed Carl's cruelty to you. "The guy who's been stuck in this house, living like a nobody. Carl's done more for me than you ever have." His voice cracked, betraying the hurt beneath his anger. I saw it then, the boy who'd once run to me with scraped knees, now a man who saw me as a failure. My chest ached, but I kept my face still. I remembered his college graduation, how I'd sold a property to cover his tuition, standing in the crowd while he hugged Carl, who'd taken credit for his success. "I gave you everything, George," I said quietly. "You just never saw it." "Everything?" He stopped pacing, his eyes narrowing. "You gave me a father I was ashamed of, a guy who let Mom down, who let us all down." He grabbed his keys from the couch, the metal jangling. "You're not the man I wanted, Dad. You never were." The words hit like a fist, knocking the air from me. I stood rooted, the clock ticking deafening now. George stormed past me, his shoulder brushing mine. The front door slammed, the sound reverberating through the house. I heard his car roar to life outside, tires screeching as he sped away. The silence that followed was heavier than any insult Carl had thrown. I sank onto the couch, the cushions sagging under me. My wife's photo watched from the shelf, her eyes soft but unyielding. She'd always believed in me, even when I doubted myself. I'd spent decades putting family first, George, her, even Carl. For what? To be called a failure by my own son. My fingers brushed the check in my pocket. Then the letter from her tucked beside it. "You're stronger than they know," she'd written. I closed my eyes, letting her words anchor me. George was wrong. Carl was wrong. I wasn't a nobody. Not anymore. I stood, my knees creaking, and crossed to the kitchen. The table was cluttered with bills, but I pushed them aside, pulling out a folder of old financial reports, documents that held the truth of my life. Years of quiet wealth hidden to protect those I loved. The clock ticked in, but it felt different now, like it was counting down to something new. I spread the papers out, my hands steady. George's words echoed, but they didn't break me. They sharpened me. I'd lost my son's respect, but I wouldn't lose my dignity. Not again. My eyes fell on the folder's edge where a name caught the light. a name I hadn't thought of in years, someone who could help me fight. The kitchen table was a battlefield of papers, financial reports, property deeds, numbers that told a story no one else had bothered to read. I sat under the glow of a single lamp, its light pooling on the warm wood, casting shadows that danced like ghosts. The house was quiet, save for the soft tick of the wall clock, its hands creeping past 8. My fingers traced a scar on Mike knuckles, a memento from a construction job I'd taken to pay for George's braces. Every mark on me was a choice, a sacrifice. But tonight, I was done being the martyr. The papers spread before me were proof of what I'd built. Decades of real estate deals, late nights studying markets, risks that paid off while I lived like I had nothing. I'd done it for them. For my wife, who deserved a life without worry. For George, who deserved a future. Even for Carl, who'd leaned on me more than he'd ever admit. I leaned back, the chair creaking, and let my eyes drift to her photo on the shelf. Her smile was steady, a beacon in the dim room. "You're stronger than they know," her letter said, tucked in my pocket next to the check. I wanted to believe her. I remembered a day 20 years ago, standing on an empty train platform, a ticket to Paris in my hand. I dreamed of showing her Europe, walking cobblestone streets, laughing over wine. But Carl's daughter, my wife, needed auditing and he couldn't pay. So I sold the tickets, gave him the money, and watched her walk down the aisle in a dress I'd quietly funded. The platform had been cold, the ticket useless. I told myself it was worth it. Now I wasn't so sure. The clock ticked, each second, a reminder of time I couldn't get back. George's words from earlier burned in my chest. "You're not the man I wanted." I'd given him everything. College, a car, a start in life. And he'd thrown it back in my face, choosing Carl's flash over my quiet strength. My fingers tightened on a report, the paper crinkling. I'd spent my life bending soothers could stand tall. "Enough. Who am I kidding?" I muttered, my voice rough in the silence. I let them walk all over me. I stood, pacing the kitchen, my boots scuffing the linoleum. The air smelled of coffee and dust, the house a museum of my choices. "No more," I said louder, as if saying it could make it real. "I'm done being their doormat." A knock at the door startled me. I crossed the room, the floorboards groaning, and opened it to find Mrs. Larson, my neighbor, holding a foil-covered dish. Her gray hair was pinned back, her smile warm but cautious. "Brought you a pie, Fred," she said, her voice soft. "Figured you could use something sweet after today." I took the dish, its warmth seeping through the foil. "You didn't have to," I said, managing a smile. "But thank you," she waved a hand, her eyes crinkling. "You're a good man, Fred Cooper. Don't let anyone tell you different." She glanced past me at the papers on the table. "You fighting something big?" I hesitated, then nodded. "Something like that." "Well, you've got more strength than they know," she said, echoing my wife's words without realizing it. "Don't forget it." She turned, her shawl fluttering as she shuffled back to her house. I closed the door, the pie heavy in my hands. Her kindness steadied me like a hand on my shoulder. I set the dish down and returned to the table, my eyes scanning the documents. Each page was a brick in the empire I'd built, hidden from the world. Carl thought he could shame me. George thought I was weak. They were wrong. I opened a drawer, the wood scraping, and rummaged through old receipts and letters. My fingers brushed a small card, its edges yellowed. A lawyer's name stared back at me. Margaret Clean, a woman I'd met years ago at a property auction. She'd been sharp, relentless, the kind of ally I needed now. I held the card, its weight light, but potent like the documents on my table. The clock ticked, but it didn't feel oppressive anymore. It was a countdown to something else. A fight I was ready to wage. I sat back down, the card in my hand, my wife's photo watching over me. Her smile seemed to say, "Go on, Fred, show them." I turned the card over, my thumb brushing the embossed letters. Everything in me was shifting like a door swinging open to a path I'd ignored too long. This was my moment. The morning sun slanted through the kitchen curtains, painting stripes on the floor. I stood at the counter, the coffee maker gurgling, its bitter scent mixing with the faint must of old wood. The house was still, the only sound the steady tick of the wall clock, its hands inching toward 9. I'd barely slept, my mind churning with George's betrayal and the lawyer's card burning a hole in my pocket. Then the doorbell rang, sharp and insistent, cutting through the quiet like a warning. I crossed to the door, my boots heavy on the creaking floorboards. A young man in a courier's uniform stood on the porch holding a manila envelope. His eyes were tired, his cap crooked. "Fred Cooper?" he asked, already thrusting the envelope toward me. "That's me," I said, taking it. The paper was stiff official, its weight unsettling. "Thanks," he nodded, already halfway down the steps. "Have a good one," he muttered, disappearing toward his van. I closed the door, the latch clicking, and stared at the envelope. My name was printed in bold. No return address. My gut twisted. This wasn't a bill or a neighbor's note. This was trouble. It tore it open, the paper ripping with a harsh sound. Inside was a single document, its text dense and formal, the kind that carried consequences. My eyes scanned the first line. Carl Wilson versus Fred Cooper. Claim for moral damages. My breath caught for $1 million. Carl was suing me, claiming I'd publicly humiliated him at the bank, damaging his reputation. His signature sprawled at the bottom, sharp and arrogant like a taunt. I sank into a chair, the document trembling in my hands. The clock ticked louder. Each second, a jab at my shock for million, for standing up to his cruelty. My face burned, anger rising like a tide. I remembered a late night call years ago. Carl, desperate, begging for a loan to save his company. I'd wired the money, no questions asked. He'd promised to repay me, but instead he bought a new car and laughed it off. Now this. How dare he? I muttered, my voice low but fierce. The paper crinkled as my grip tightened, the words blurring. Carl wasn't just fighting back. He was trying to bury me, to take everything I had built and twist it into his victory. My pulse raced, but beneath the anger, something colder took root. Resolve. I stood, the chair scraping, and grabbed my phone. The lawyer's card, Margaret Klein's name in crisp black letters, lay on the table next to the document. It dialed her number, my fingers steady, despite the storm in my chest. The Lina rang twice before she picked up, her voice crisp and confident. "Klein Legal." Margaret speaking. "Margaret, it's Fred Cooper," I said, pacing the kitchen. "We met at a property auction a few years back. I need your help." A pause, then a hint of recognition. "Fred, I remember what's going on." It summarized the lawsuit, my words clipped. "Carl Wilson suing me for $4 million. Says I humiliated him. It's nonsense, but he's got connections." She let out a low whistle. "That's bold, even for Carl. He's got a reputation, but it's a stretch." Her tone sharpened. "We can fight it, Fred, but it won't be easy. He's got friends in high places." "I'm not backing down," I said, my voice firm. "He's taken enough from me." "Good," she replied, a smile in her voice. "Let's meet tomorrow. Bring everything you've got on him." I hung up, the phone warm in my hand. The document lay on the table, its words a challenge I wouldn't ignore. I thought of Carl's face in the bank, crumpling as I mentioned his betrayal. He was scared then. He should be now. The clock ticked, urgent now, like a drum beat-at. I grabbed my jacket, the check-in card still in my pocket, and headed for the door. The morning air was cool, the street quiet, except for a distant car engine, George's maybe, or me imagination. I shook it off. No time for pain. Not now. I stepped onto the porch, the document tucked under my arm. The sun was higher, the world bright and unyielding. Each step felt heavier, sure carrying me toward a fight I was ready to win. The streets of Billings buzzed with morning traffic as I parked my pickup outside a squat brick building downtown. The folder in my hand, Carl's lawsuit paper sand, my own financial records, felt like a weapon heavy with purpose. My boots scrunched on the sidewalk, the spring air sharp against my face. I adjusted my jacket, its frayed cuffs a stark contrast to the polished glass door ahead. Margaret Klein's name gleamed in gold lettering, promising a fight I was ready to wage. The clock in my mind ticked, counting down to the court date. Time was tight, but I was sharper. It pushed through the door, a bell jangling above. The office smelled of ink and old leather, its walls lined with sagging bookshelves. A desk lamp cast a warm glow, battling the gray light from a single window. A wall clock ticked its second-hand jerky like it was struggling to keep up. The receptionist, a young woman with a tight ponytail, glanced up from her computer. "Mr. Cooper?" she asked. Her voice clipped. I nodded, and she waved me toward a hallway. M. Klein's waiting. Margaret's office was cramped beautifully, papers stacked neatly on her desk. She stood as I entered, her gray suit crisp, her hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun. Her eyes sharp as a hawk, softened slightly. "Fred," she said, extending a hand. "Been a while." Her grip was firm, a reminder of the property auction where we'd first met. Her outbidding a cocky developer, me quietly securing a lot no one else wanted. "Too long," I said, settling into a creaky chair. I slid the folder across her desk, the lawsuit papers on top. "Carl's playing dirty for million for his ego. It's a joke." Margaret skimmed the document, her lips pursing. The clock ticking filled the silence each second and nudged toward the fight ahead. "He's got nerve," she muttered, flipping a page. "Claims you slandered him in public, ruined his reputation. He's got friends in this town, Fred. Judges, councilmen. This won't be a walk in the park." I leaned forward, my hands steady. "I don't expect it to be, but Carl's not as untouchable as he thinks." My voice was calm, but my pulse 3. I thought of the bank, his face crumpling when I mentioned his betrayal. I had something on him, something more than words, but I wasn't ready to show my hand. Margaret raised an eyebrow, her pen tapping the desk. "You've got a plan, don't you? Something you're not telling me." Her tone was half curious, half challenging. I smiled just enough to keep her guessing. "Let's say I've got a few cards up my sleeve. Things Carl doesn't know. I know." My fingers brushed the folder, the documents inside. A quiet promise. I remembered a lawsuit 20 years ago. A shady partner who tried to cheat me on a deal. I'd won then, digging up evidence he thought was buried. This time would be no different. Care to share? Margaret pressed, her eyes narrowing. The receptionist typing drifted through the door, a faint rhythm under the clock's relentless beat. "Not yet," I said, my voice low. "But when the time comes, you'll have everything you need to bury him." I leaned back, the chair groaning. My wife's letter, tucked in my pocket, seemed to pulse with her words. "You're stronger than they know." She believed in me. Now I believed in myself. Margaret nodded, a spark of respect in her eyes. "All right, Fred. We'll start with discovery. Pull his financials. See Waith's hiding. But if you've got something solid, don't wait too long." She jotted a note, her pen scratching. "He's got a head start and his connections run deep." "I'm not worried," I said, and I meant it. Carl had underestimated me for years. George had too, but I wasn't the man they thought I was. Not anymore. The clock ticked. It sounds sharper now, like a countdown to justice. Margaret slid the folder back to me. Here expression, all business. "We've got work to do. I'll file a motion to dismiss, but we need to be ready for a fight." "You in all the way?" I said, standing. It tucked the folder under my arm, its weight grounding me. The office door loomed ahead. Not just an exit, but agate way to the next move. I thought of Carl's smug grin, George's angry words. They'd both learned soon enough. I stepped into the hallway, the receptionist glancing up as I passed. The street outside was louder now, cars honking, life moving on. I pushed through the glass door, the bell jangling behind me. The folder was heavy, but my steps were light. The wind stung my cheeks, carrying the promise of spring and something more. My plan was taking shape, piece by piece. The lamp on my desk buzzed faintly, casting a harsh glow over the clutter of bank statements and property records. My home office, a spare bedroom with a sagging bookshelf and a chipped coffee mug, was my war room now. The air smelled of stale grounds and ink. The only sound, the soft tick of a shelf clock, its hands creeping toward midnight. I scribbled notes on a legal pad, my pencil scratching as I cross-referenced Carl's loans against my own investments. Every number was a clue. Every line a step closer to tearing down his facade. My wife's photo watched from the wall, her smile a quiet push to keep going. I leaned back, my chair creaking, and rubbed my eyes. The lawsuit loomed, but I wasn't just defending myself. I was building a case. Carl's betrayal in the bank wasn't enough. I needed proof, something undeniable. My phone sat beside me, Margaret's number on speed dial. But tonight, I needed someone else. I dialed Frank, a private investigator I'd hired once to track a shady tenant. His voice, when he answered, was growly, laced with cigarette smoke. "Fred, hell, it's late. What's cooking?" "Carl Wilson," I said, my voice low. I need dirt. Something solid. I glanced at the clock. It's ticking, a reminder of the court date barreling toward me. Frank chuckled, a dry, cynical sound. Wilson's a slippery bastard, but nobody's clean. What are we looking for? Anything that proves he's not the saint he pretends to be, I said. Start with his personal life. You know what I saw at the diner? I remembered that night Carl laughing with a woman, his hand on hers, oblivious to me in the corner. I'd kept quiet then for my wife's sake. Now silence wasn't an option. Got it, Frank said. I'll poke around. But if he's got secrets, they're buried deep. Could get messy. Messy's fine, I replied, my fingers tightening on the phone. Just get me something I can use. I hung up, the room's silence heavier now. The documents on my desk were a map of Carl's lies, loans he defaulted on, deals he'd fudged. But they weren't enough. Not yet. My phone buzzed. George's name flashing on the screen. My heart lurched. I hadn't spoken to him since he stormed out, his words still raw. You're not the man I wanted. I let it ring, my thumb hovering, then answered. George, I said, my voice flat. Dad, he started, his tone softer, hesitant. Look, maybe I was too harsh. Can we talk? I don't want this wall between us. His words were a lifeline, but they came too late. I closed my eyes, the clocks ticking loud in my ears. Part of me wanted to say yes to mend things, but I saw Carl's shadow behind him, the years of misplaced loyalty. You need to figure out who you're standing with, son, I said, my voice steady but cold. This isn't the time. Dad, come on, he started. But I cut him off. Not now, George. I hung up, my chest tight. The room felt smaller, the air thicker. I'd chosen my fight over my son, and it hurt like hell. But I couldn't stop, not when I was this close. I stood pacing to the window. The street was dark, a neighbor's porch light flickering. I remembered another night years ago, spotting Carl at a cafe with a woman who wasn't Margaret. I turned away then, thinking it wasn't my place. Now it was my weapon. He returned to the desk, the documents waiting like soldiers. The clock ticked, relentless, pushing me forward. A knock at the front door broke my focus. I frowned, crossing the house. It was Mrs. Larson holding a thermos. Couldn't sleep, she said, her smile sheepish. Thought you might need coffee. I took it, grateful, but my mind was elsewhere. Folks are talking about your lawsuit, she added, her eyes searching. You holding up? Better than Carl will? I said, forcing a smile. She nodded, sensing I wasn't ready to talk, and left. I closed the door, the thermos warm in my hands, and returned to my office. The clock's ticking felt urgent now, like a heartbeat. My phone pinged, a text from Frank. Found something juicy. Meet me tomorrow. I stared at the screen, my pulse quickening. The documents on my desk seemed to hum alive with possibility. I sat down, the coffee forgotten, and opened the message again. This was it. The manila envelope from Frank sat on my kitchen table, its edges creased from the courier's grip. Morning light filtered through the blinds, glinting off the coffee pot, the air sharp with the scent of brewed grounds. The house was quiet, the wall clocks took a steady pulse, counting down to the court date. I sliced the envelope open, my knife a steady, and pulled out a stack of photos and a typed report. The top images stopped me cold. Carl in a dimly lit restaurant, his arm around a woman with dark hair, their smiles too close for casual. My lips curled. Not quite a smile, but something harder. Got you. He spread the photos out, each one a nail in Carl's coffin. The report detailed dates, times, even an affidavit from a waiter who'd seen them together weekly. My fingers brushed the clock's edge. It's ticking louder now, like it knew the stakes. I'd seen Carl with her before, a year ago, at a bistro downtown. I'd been picking up takeout, my wife's memory heavy, and there he was, laughing like he had no wife at home. I'd kept quiet then for Margaret's sake. Now I'd use it to break him. I dialed Margaret clean, my voice calm but edged. Got something for you? I said when she answered photos. Witness statements. Carl's been stepping out on Margaret. This will sink him. She let out a low whistle. Papers rustling on her end. That's dynamite, Fred. If we play this right, his whole moral damages claim falls apart. Meet me at the office in an hour. We'll plan the attack. Her excitement was infectious, but I stayed cool. This wasn't victory. Not yet. I hung up, tucking the photos into a folder. The clock ticked, its rhythm reminder of the days slipping away. I thought of Carl's face in the bank, crumpling when I mentioned his betrayal. He begged then. He'd beg again. My wife's letter in my pocket seemed to hum with approval. "You're stronger than they know." She'd written. I was proving it. My phone rang, shattering the quiet. Carl's name flashed on the screen, and my pulse spiked. I answered, my voice ice. "What do you want?" "You're digging where you shouldn't, Fred," he snarled, his voice low, venomous. "Keep this up and I'll ruin you. Your name, your money gone." His words were a blade, but they didn't cut. Not anymore. I leaned against the counter, the photos in front of me. "Funny, Carl. I was about to say the same to you." My tone was steady, almost amused. "How's Margaret doing? Had a good talk with her lately." He went silent, his breathing heavy. "You wouldn't dare," he hissed. "You're bluffing." "Try me," I said, and hung up. My heart pounded, but my hands were steady. The clock ticking filled the room, a drum beat to my resolve. Carl thought he could scare me off like he'd done for years. He was wrong. I grabbed my jacket, the folder under my arm, and headed out. The drive to Margaret's office was quick, the streets of Billings waking up with delivery trucks and early commuters. Her building loomed ahead, its brick facade solid, unyielding. "I parked?" My boots hitting the pavement with purpose. The glass door reflected my face, older, lined, but sharp with intent. I pushed through, the bell jangling. Margaret was waiting, her desk cluttered with legal pads. She took the folder, her eyes scanning the photos. "This is gold," she said, her voice alive with strategy. "We'll file a counterclaim, defamation, emotional distress. He's got no leg to stand on." She looked up, her smile fierce. "You ready to take him down?" "Been ready for years," I said, settling into a chair. The offices smelled of coffee and determination, the clock on her wall ticking in sync with my own. I remembered a family dinner, Carl boasting while I sat silent, my wife's hand on mine. I protected his secrets then for her. Now I'd use them for me. We spread the documents out, plotting our moves. The photos were our ace, but we needed more financial discrepancies, anything to expose Carl's lies. Margaret scribbled notes, her pen flying. The door to her office stood ajar, a sliver of hallway visible, like apathy to the courtroom. I leaned forward, my mind racing with possibilities. Everything was falling into place. The courtroom in Billings smelled of polished wood and stale coffee, its high ceiling amplifying the murmur of spectators. I sat at the defendant's table, my tie a touch too tight, my hands gripping the edge of the oak surface. The folder of evidence, photos, bank records, and the damning security footage lay in front of me, a quiet arsenal. The clock above the judge's bench ticked, its sounds sharp in the tense air, counting down to the moment I've been building toward. My lawyer, Margaret Clean, adjusted her glasses, her calm confidence a steady anchor. Across the aisle, Carl Wilson fidgeted, his tailored suit creased, his fingers drumming nervously on the table. He avoided my gaze, but I caught George's eyes in the back row, his face a storm of doubt and regret. The judge, a stern woman with gray hair pulled tight, banged her gavel. "Order," she said, her voice cutting through the whispers. "Mr. Wilson, your counsel may proceed." Carl's lawyer, a slick man with a sharp smile, stood. "Your Honor, Fred Cooper publicly humiliated my client in First Interstate Bank, slandering his character and causing irreparable harm. We seek $4 million in damages for this deliberate attack." His words were smooth, practiced, but I saw Carl flinch, his eyes darting to the crowd. Margaret, his wife, sat rigid in the front row, her lips a thin line. Margaret Klein leaned toward me, her voice low. "Ready for the fireworks." I nodded, my jaw tight. The clock ticked, relentless, as Carl's lawyer painted me as a vindictive nobody, twisting the bank scene into melodrama. I kept my face still, but my pulse raised. I thought of my wife's letter in my pocket. "You're stronger than they know." She was right. I was ready. "Your Honor," Margaret Clean said, rising, her tone sharp but composed. "The plaintiff's claims are baseless. We have evidence that proves Mr. Cooper acted within his rights and spoke the truth." She held up a USB drive, its black casing glinting. "Security footage from the bank provided by the manager shows the incident in full." The courtroom buzzed, heads turning. Carl's face palled, his hands clenching. George leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. The judge nodded, and a clerk set up a scream. The footage played grainy but clear. Me at the teller's window, calm, asking for my money. Carl mocking, his voice loud, calling me a beggar. Then his collapse unprompted, his knee hitting the floor as I mentioned his betrayal. The crowd gasped, an elderly woman in the back nodding approvingly, her eyes on me. "That's not how it happened," Carl blurted, his voice cracking. His lawyer hissed at him to be quiet, but the damage was done. The judge's eyes narrowed, her gavel hovering. Margaret Clean pressed on, her voice steady. "The footage shows Mr. Cooper made no threats. Mr. Wilson's reaction was his own, driven by guilt." I glanced at George. His face was a mix of shock and something else. Doubt, maybe, or shame. He believed Carl's lies for too long, but now the truth was cracking through. I remembered a deal I'd struck years ago, trading a favor with the bank manager to keep my accounts private. That favor had gotten me the footage, a key I'd held close until now. "Your Honor, we move to dismiss," Margaret said, her voice rising. "The plaintiff's claims are not only unfounded, but an attempt to deflect from his own misconduct." She slid a photo across the table, Carl with the other woman, their hands touching. Margaret, his wife, stiffened, her knuckles widening on her purse. The judge called for order, her gavel sharp. Carl's lawyer stammered, trying toe pivot, but the room was against him. Spectators whispered, their voices a low hum. I sat back, my heart steady, despite the chaos. This was my moment, not just to win, but to show them who I was. The judge raised a hand, silencing the room. "We'll take a recess to review the evidence," she said, her tone final. "Court resumes in 1 hour." The gavel fell, and the crowd erupted in murmurs. Margaret Clean gave me a nod, her eyes gleaming with victory. I stood, my chair scraping, and met George's gaze. His expression was unreadable, but something had shifted. I moved toward the exit, the folder under my arm, the clock ticking fading behind me. The heavy doors of the courtroom loomed, a threshold to whatever came next. It pushed through, my step steady, George's eyes still burning in my mind. The courtroom doors swung shut behind me, muffling the buzz of the crowd. I stood in the hallway, the air cooler, smelling faintly of wax and dust. My tie felt looser now, but my chest was tight, the weight of the moment pressing down. The folder of evidence was still under my arm, its contents, photos, footage, truths, having torn through Carl's lies like a blade. The clock on the wall ticked, its hands frozen at 10 minutes to the hour. Time had paused just for a moment, as if giving me space to breathe. But I wasn't done yet. Back in the courtroom, the judge's voice echoed in my memory. Sharp and final recess until 1. I'd seen Carl's face as we broke. Ashen, his hands trembling, his confidence shattered. Margaret, his wife, had stared straight ahead, her fingers twisting her wedding ring. George, my son, had looked at me, his eyes heavy with something I hadn't seen in years. Regret. I wanted to believe it meant something, but I'd learned not to trust hope too quickly. I found a bench and sat, the wood creaking under me. The hallway was quiet, save for the distant clack of a clerk's heels. I opened the folder, glancing at the photo of Carl with the other woman. It wasn't just evidence. It was a promise I'd made to my wife years ago to protect our family's honor. I'd failed her then, staying silent about Carl's betrayals to keep the peace. Now I was making it right. The doors opened, and George stepped out, his suit rumpled, his face drawn. He hesitated, then sat beside me, the bench groaning. "Dad," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. I was wrong about you, about Carl." His words were halting like they hurt to say. "I saw the footage. He lied to me all this time." I looked at him, my son, the boy I'd raised, now a man grappling with truth. My throat tightened, but I kept my voice steady. "You chose what you saw, George. I don't blame you, but I had to fight. I thought of a summer day, him at 6 running to me with a caught fish, his grin wide. I promised my wife I'd always be there for him, even now." "I'm sorry," he said, his eyes dropping to the floor. "I thought you were weak. I was blind." He rubbed his neck, the gesture so like mine it stung. "Can we fix this?" I reached out, my hand on his shoulder. "You're my son. We start over right here." My voice cracked just a little. He nodded, his eyes wet, and we sat in silence, the clock ticking above us. For the first time in years, I felt him beside me, not against me. The door opened again, and Margaret Clean waved me back in. "It's time," she said, her smile sharp. I stood, George following, and we re-entered the courtroom. The air was electric, the crowd hushed. Carl sat slumped, his lawyer whispering urgently. Margaret, his wife, stood suddenly, her voice cutting through the room. "I'm done, Carl," she said, her tone ice. "I'm filing for divorce. You've lied to me for the last time." She tossed her ring onto the table, the clink echoing. The crowd gasped. An elderly woman in the back clapping softly, her eyes bright. Carl's head sank, his hands covering his face. The judge banged her gavel, her voice booming. "Order. The court has reviewed the evidence. The plaintiff's claim is dismissed. Mr. Cooper acted within his rights, and the footage supports his account." The room erupted, cheers mixing with murmurs. Margaret Klein squeezed my arm, her grin fierce. "We did it, Fred." I exhaled, the weight lifting, the clock's ticking softened like it was finally at peace. I'd won. Not just the case, but my dignity. George's hand found mine. A brief, firm grip. The crowd's applause washed over me, but it was his touch that mattered most. I moved toward the exit, the heavy doors ahead. Carl's broken figure faded behind me, irrelevant now. Margaret, his wife, stormed out, her heels clicking. I pushed through the doors, the spring air hitting my face, sharp and clean. George walked beside me, silent but present. I thought of what lay ahead. A new chapter, maybe a new home. The sun was high, the street alive with possibility. The realtor's office smelled of fresh paint and ambition, its windows framing a view of Billings' quiet streets. I sat at a sleek desk, my pen hovering over the final papers for my new apartment. The keys lay beside me, their metal cool and bright, a promise of something fresh. My jacket hung on the chair, no longer a symbol of struggle, but of a man who'd fought and won. The clock on the wall ticked softly, its rhythm calm, like the world had finally slowed to let me breathe. I signed the last page, my signature steady, and slid the papers to the realtor, a young woman with a warm smile. "Congratulations, Mr. Cooper," she said, handing me the keys. "This place is going to suit you." Her enthusiasm was genuine, and I nodded, feeling a lightness I hadn't known in years. The apartment was modest, but bright, with wide windows overlooking a park where kids played and trees swayed in the spring breeze. I'd chosen it for the view, for the quiet, a place to rebuild. I drove to the apartment, thikis jangling in my pocket next to my wife's letter. The building was new, its walls crisp white, the air inside sharp with the scent of varnish. I walked through the empty rooms, my boots echoing on the hardwood. In the living room, I set a photo of her on the mantel, her smile soft, eternal. "We did it," I whispered, my fingers brushing the frame. The clock on the wall ticked, a gentle reminder of time moving forward, not back. Later that day, Emmett with a lawyer, not Margaret Clean, but a trust specialist, a wiry man with thick glasses. We sat in his office, papers spread out, detailing a trust fund for a local charity. It was her dream, mine too, to give back to Billings, to help people like Mrs. Larson, who'd been kind when I needed it most. I signed the documents, my hand steady, the weight of my wealth, no longer a secret, but a tool. The lawyer shook my hand, his grip firm. "This will do a lot of good, Fred," he said. I nodded, thinking of her, of the promises we'd made under starlit skies. That evening, George came over, his knock hesitant, but welcome. I opened the door, the new apartment's light spilling onto the hall. He held a fishing rod, its handle worn, the one we'd used on summer trips when he was a boy. "Thought we could hit the river soon," he said, his voice shy, almost hopeful. His suit was gone, replaced by jeans and a flannel shirt like he was trying to be the kid I remembered. I grinned, taking the rod. "You're buying the bait," I teased, and he laughed, a sound I hadn't theored in too long. We sat on the new couch, still stiff from the store, and talked, really talked for the first time in years. "I'm proud of you, Dad," he said, his eyes meeting mine. "I was wrong about everything. You're here now," I said, my voice thick. "That's what counts." We swapped stories, his about work, mine about the trial. He laughed when I mimicked Carl's courtroom stammer, and I felt a warmth I thought I'd lost. I remembered a night by the river, him small and wide-eyed, asking if we'd always be a team. I'd said yes. Then I meant it now. The clock ticked. It sounded a soft backdrop to our laughter. I thought of the fight, Carl's downfall, Margaret's departure, the courtroom's applause. It had cost me years of silence, but it had given me back my son, my dignity. I'd kept my promise to her, to myself. The trust fund was just the start. There'd be more. Scholarships maybe, or a community center. I'd figure it out. I stepped onto the balcony, George following. The park below was alive with evening joggers, kids chasing a ball. The sun dipped low, painting the sky gold and pink. I leaned on the railing, the air cool, the world open. George stood beside me, quiet but close. I thought of the courtroom doors, the way they'd swung shut on my old life. These new doors, literal, metaphorical, were wide open. I walked to the park later, alone, the grass soft under my boots. An oak stood tall, its branches swaying. I stopped beneath it, the sunset warming my face. The clock in my mind had stopped ticking, replaced by a quiet certainty. I'd fought, I'd won, and now I could live. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.